Blessings, everybody. This is Dale. Thanks for joining with me on the Word Podcast. We're pressing on in the story of David. We're in 1 Samuel, beginning with the first verse of chapter 20 now. This is a very poignant scene. This is a very intense scene, a very emotional encounter. It's pretty long. I don't remember how many, 20-something verses this chapter. Let me see. It doesn't really matter. Like I said, it's 42 verses. It's long. And so, but the account gives us such insight to what was happening, to the danger that David was under, the danger that Jonathan was under, the intensity of emotions, the desire to live rightly before God, the desire to have some things beyond this life. I mean, you actually see it right here. The intensity of the anger that Saul had and his desire to try to kill David. We've already seen that he's attempted, 12 times so far to kill him? And the most recent time we saw in the previous chapter where Saul had actually gone to Naioth and Ramah to capture David himself, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon Saul and he prophesied. Okay, some curious scenes, right? And sort of following up on that, a lot of times people say, well, God doesn't do that kind of stuff today. He will not do something. As a matter of fact, some commentaries say that God did that to Saul to embarrass him. I think that's a rather simplistic way of looking at it. Would it be embarrassing to be laid out for a night and a day before a prophet? And apparently they had no clothes on because it says it was naked, that Saul was naked, and to be laid out like that prophesying? Well, that would have a tendency to chisel away at your pride some, okay, and there's no doubt. But I don't think that was the main motivation that God had in this. What was the main motivation? Well, the messengers and Saul found out that God is sovereign, and he's sovereign over all. So if you think you're going to come and arrest and kill God's anointed, and God doesn't want that to happen, it's not going to happen, and that he can do what he desires to do. Well, David had sense, because the very next thing we see here in the first verse of the 20th chapter says this: then David fled from Naioth and Ramah. So he left. It doesn't say when he left. I imagine he left while Saul is laid out there for a day and for a night. In other words, he couldn't pursue him. But David fled from there, and he came and said to Jonathan. So he literally fled from there, and he went before Jonathan. So where's Jonathan? Well, we're not told forthrightly, but apparently he was at his place. He's back in town. Okay, he's in the palace. Somehow David got together with Jonathan, and he says this to Jonathan. First verse: "What have I done? What is my iniquity, and what is my sin before your father, that he is seeking my life?" And so this is being ongoing. Like I said, there's been at least a dozen attempts right here. And David is mad. David is frustrated. He's for Jonathan, and he's saying, what have I done? Tell me what is it? What is my iniquity? What is my sin? Why is he trying to kill me? So verse 2. So he said to him, Jonathan says to David, "Far from it, you shall not die." So Jonathan is promising David that he will not die. How can Jonathan promise David that he's not going to die? We've already seen little hints of it when Jonathan made a covenant with David, when he gave him his robe, when he gave him his weaponry and things like that. That was actually a covenant scene, and we're going to see more about it in this chapter also. And so Jonathan knew that David was the one that would become the next king. David knew that he would be the next king because he'd already been anointed by God. His family knew it. Remember, his brothers was there. Dad was there. They knew it. So now Jonathan is saying, "No, you shall not die." Then Jonathan continues, "Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. So why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so." And so Jonathan knew already that his father had tried to kill him. We saw places where Jonathan was a mediator that reconciled him, and David came back into the house in his old role and functioning. Remember that? So we've seen that. It's not that he's saying that my dad didn't want to do that or he wouldn't want to do it. He's saying, if he's trying to do that right now, I would know about it. But guess what? He didn't know about it. Verse 3, "Yet David vowed again, saying, Your father knows well that I have found favor in your sight. And he has said, do not let Jonathan know this, or he will be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is hardly a step between me and death. Woo, you can hear the despair of David right here. You can hear the desperation. You can hear the irritation coming through right here. And he's telling Jonathan, yeah, your dad is trying to do this, but he has told the folks, don't let Jonathan know about this. He didn't want Jonathan to be grieved because he knew that David had found favor in the sight of Jonathan. And David's telling us, I'm telling you right now, there's hardly a step between me and death. He's about to get me, and something's about to happen. So verse 4, then Jonathan said to David, whatever you say, I will do for you. So, in other words, he's saying, okay, what do you want to know? What do you want to happen? What's the plan? You got a plan? David had a plan. Verse 5, so David said to Jonathan, behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I ought to sit down to eat with the king. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field until the third evening. Again, another little third day motif. You see this third day motif all through Scripture. And so apparently there was a festival that was held by Saul every month at the new moon. And it was a multi-day event. We're about to see this, a 2 or 3 day event. And David had already thought, wait a minute, tomorrow is that new moon festival. So here's what's going to happen. Let me go. He said, I'm supposed to sit there, because he said that. I ought to sit down with the king. I'm supposed to be at this thing. But let me go. Then verse 6, David continues, if your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, because it is a yearly sacrifice there for the whole family. Hang on a second.
I didn't get that.
Yeah, I know you did.
Try again.
No. Y'all hear that? I tell you what, with the latest updates, just a second. I tell you, this woman that lives inside my computer, you know who I'm talking about? In recent, I guess months now, last 3, 4, 5, 6 months, has become hyper, I want to say the word sensitive, but I mean, that's what it is. When I say certain things, I think just then when I said city, it set it off. When you say it, certain kind of, it wants to know. In other words, they're listening even closer, folks. They really are. They're listening even closer. And, I hate it. I despise it. But I view it as so in the gospel. And so maybe somebody in the powers that be will get saved because of what they hear, right? So anyway, that's always intriguing. So David is saying this, if your father misses me at all, he says he may not miss me. He said, may not miss me at all. But if he does miss me, say that you allowed me to go to Bethlehem, to run to this city, the city of my birth, because we have a yearly sacrifice there. And then David says this. He tells him how to interpret this. Verse 7. If he says, it is good, okay. In other words, the king says, oh, that's all right. Your servant will be safe. And David means your servant himself. But if he is very angry, know that he's decided on evil. So there's all sorts of questions that arise out of this. Sometimes along this line, was David telling Jonathan to lie? Were they just creating the scenario to flesh out the truth? I prefer to think it's a scenario to flesh out the truth. All is fair in love and war, right? In other words, they're creating something right here to see how the king reacts to it, to see what's going to happen, to see what's going to occur. So my time's up. We're going to find out that it becomes abundantly evident because of this strategy right here. Well, again, I'm Dale. Hey, thank you for your time. I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.